Welcome to the MTM Driver and Attendant Training course. Throughout this course, we'll cover a number of topics including fraud, waste, and abuse, our drug and alcohol policy, and record keeping. This training course is a contractual requirement and is required that you go through this course annually. So once a year, you must go through and pass the quiz for this course. We will begin with fraud, waste, and abuse, and first I want to cover what is fraud, waste, and abuse. Fraud is intentional deception or misrepresentation made by a person with knowledge. That deception could result in some unauthorized benefit for himself or some other person. It includes any act that constitutes fraud under any applicable federal and state laws. Waste is overutilization of services or other practices that result in unnecessary costs. Generally, it's not caused by criminally negligent actions, but rather a misuse of resources. What is abuse? Provider practices that are inconsistent with sound fiscal, business, or medical practices and result in unnecessary cost to Medicaid or Medicare programs, reimbursement for unnecessary services or services that fail to meet professional recognized standards for health care. It includes covered person or covered member practices that result in unnecessary costs. You'll see a couple of examples here as far as what is member fraud, waste, and abuse. So it may be up to and including changing, forging, or altering any sort of prescriptions, medical records, referral forms. It includes lending or borrowing someone else's insurance card. It also includes, NEMT or non-emergent medical transportation for non-medical services. Now let's cover first tier fraud, waste, and abuse. So first tier, that includes downstream and related entities. How that relates to you, a first tier is also a transportation company. That company's drivers or attendants, so that's you all, and other employees. Example of first tier fraud, waste, and abuse includes falsifying credentials such as a criminal background check or a driver's record, billing services that weren't actually rendered, inappropriate billing, double billing, upcoding or unbundling to gain more money, collusion, or falsifying information submitted through prior authorization or some other mechanism to justify coverage. If you suspect there's fraud, waste, and abuse, you want to contact MTM. We have a compliance auditor on our team here who investigates any reported incidents. We note the member's file. If it's a transportation company or other first tier, we actually handle these in the same manner, and then we report these to our clients on a monthly basis. All right, now we'll move on to ADA and civil rights. Civil rights protection is for over 50 million Americans, and ADA is a civil rights law that was passed by Congress in 1990. Prior to that, there was inaccessible public transit for over 43 million Americans. It kept these individuals from accessing schools, workplace, or otherwise contributing as members of their communities. The ADA gave these individuals with disabilities the same opportunities as others. Now, under the ADA law, we do have the definition as they define a person with a disability. It includes individuals with physical or mental impairments that substantially limit one or more major life activity, individuals with a record of such impairment, or individuals regarded as having an impairment. It also addresses transportation provided by public and private held entities. Now, the ADA also outlines certain training requirements that must be in place for all companies. They include the fact that vehicle operators, so this is you, whether you're a driver or an attendant, you must be able to function and must be trained to function the vehicles and all of their equipment safely. You must be trained to provide the required level of service for the member, and you must be trained to treat members with disabilities in a respectful and courteous way. The ADA also outlines that we must announce stops upon request, permit service animals to accompany members, permit members to travel with life support such as oxygen, make appropriate use of accessibility-related equipment, and provide adequate time for the members to board and disembark the vehicles. Moving on, the ADA also outlines certain things that we cannot do. That includes the fact that we cannot discriminate or deny service if the member is capable of using it. We cannot require the use of a designated priority seating, impose special charges based on disability, gender, religion, national origin, race, or age. We cannot require an attendant or refuse service because the member their disability results in behavior that may offend, annoy, or inconvenience. I want you to take note, though, that it's not considered discrimination to refuse service if the member is engaging in violent, seriously disruptive, or illegal conduct. As we communicate with the member, we want to make sure that we are providing high-quality service for the member at all times. This is regardless of their age, ability, or disability. We want to always, again, just as we outlined with the ADA, treat members in a respectful and courteous way. Safety tips while driving. You should never use your cell phone unless you've got a hands-free or Bluetooth type device. And I certainly hope that this is something that's already in practice, but we should never ever text while driving. It's definitely a critical item to keep in mind. Do not text. If you have to get in touch with someone, pull over, stop the vehicle, and then proceed. As we communicate with the members, you always want to be professional with your communication and your language that you use. We want to be as accurate and specific as possible. And think about this as we drop a member off at a large facility or a hospital with multiple entrances and exits. As you drop them off, you know you're going to come back and pick them up to transport them home for that round trip. Go ahead and decide with that member what location or what entrance or exit you'll meet the member. This will not only save you time in the long run, but it will also save that member time in the long run and make it a much more pleasurable experience for the member. Of course, we want to put the emphasis on the member first and avoid any sort of stereotypes. Regarding professionalism, just to expand a little bit here, we touched on it just a moment ago when we were talking about communication. As you pull up to the location or as you arrive at a location, you always want to greet, introduce yourself, and offer all members assistance. Of course, we want to reply to any questions that are asked to us, provide that safe and comfortable trip, address any problems that may arise promptly. You want to acknowledge and respond to any sort of special request. You'll see how important it is in just a moment as we review the record keeping, but we do want to make sure that we are keeping very accurate records. Again, always remain professional and courteous with all members, no matter what situation may arise, and treat everyone with dignity and respect. Now we're going to review some of the expectations that the members may have. All of these are reasonable expectations and, of course, should always be met. They will vary, rightfully so, expect safe and timely transportation. Your vehicle should be clean and comfortable for them. We want to provide any assistance as the members board and disembark the vehicle. That includes securement. Any travel guidance or directions we want to offer if asked. And again, they should be treated in a dignity and respectful way. Moving on to abuse and neglect. First, we want to cover what is abuse and neglect. Abuse is something that is done intentionally or through carelessness that injures oneself or another. There are several types of abuse. They include verbal, physical, emotional, and sexual. Neglect is something that one unintentionally or through carelessness does not do that should be done and ends up harming oneself or another. Now, if you suspect that there's abuse or neglect going on, you want to contact your supervisor or your dispatch as set forth by your company's policies and procedures. If it's severe enough, you want to go ahead and contact those emergency services to get that individual the help that's needed. You want to document all of the situation in as much detail as possible. This should be recorded on MTM's incident and accident form, which should be available and in everyone's vehicle. Now, from time to time, you may experience that a member is abusive or violent. If you have someone that is being abusive or violent to another member in the vehicle or to you, the first thing you want to do is you want to address it immediately. Ask him or her to correct their actions and behavior. You want to contact your supervisor or dispatch, again, in accordance with your company's policies. And then you want to document the incident in as much detail as possible using MTM's incident and accident form. Regarding passenger securement, we've got a number of things here to remind you of that you want to keep in mind as you're transporting. The first one is that wheelchairs and mobility devices must be secured using that 4-point floor securement system. Each of those 4-point floor securement system locations must have a 3-point passenger restraint system, which is illustrated over here on the right-hand side. Things to keep in mind regarding that is we cannot deny service based on the difficulty of securing a member's wheelchair or mobility device. We must permit standees, and standees is an ADA term here. So this is outlined by ADA. It's a requirement. We must permit a standee to use the lift or ramp if requested. So let's say we're going to go pick up Mrs. Smith today, and although she doesn't have a wheelchair, we just happen to be in a wheelchair accessible vehicle, she sees that we've got the lift, and as she walks out to the vehicle, she says, you know, I can't step up or something into the vehicle. I'd like to use that lift to gain access to the vehicle. At that point, we must go ahead and lower that lift for her and allow her to gain access to the vehicle by that lift. Something to point out regarding restraints. Just a moment ago, I mentioned the 3-point passenger restraint system. In your vehicles, instead of asking everyone to buckle their seat belts, you want to ask everyone to restrain themselves using the 3-point passenger restraints. The reason for that is because we can't require one to have a seat belt and one to have a restraint. Now, regarding lifts and ramps, all of these mobility devices or wheelchairs must fit within that envelope of securement, and only you as the vehicle operator should be controlling this lift. Mom, dad, guardian may have great intentions, may want to be very helpful. However, because they have not been trained on the proper operation and safety of this lift or ramp, they should not operate it. Only you should be in control of that lift or ramp. From time to time, you may have an individual who comes out to the vehicle in a wheelchair. However, they don't wish to be transported, or they don't need to be transported within that wheelchair for the trip itself. Now, this is something that we can recommend, but we can never require. And if you do have someone who will transfer, again, we always want to ask if they need assistance. We want to offer that assistance. And then you want to store and secure that wheelchair in the back of the vehicle. Now, the reason why I say secure and not just store it in the back of the vehicle, because let's say we're in the van now, we're heading down the road, that wheelchair is just sitting in the back of the van. Car in front of us stops suddenly. Of course, we're going to have to stop suddenly to avoid any sort of collision. That wheelchair could fly forward. It could become a projectile. It could hit the member. It could hit you. Of course, we don't want anyone to be injured from a wheelchair, so again, we store and secure any walkers, wheelchairs, etc. that may be in the vehicle. Now to review a couple of the driver or attendant responsibilities we have here. You, as the driver or attendant, are responsible for securing a car seat or child safety seat within the vehicle itself. Mom, dad, guardian, they are responsible for restraining the child within that car safety or child safety seat. Of course, before you allow that vehicle to proceed, before you put it in drive, you want to make sure that everyone is properly restrained and secured. Regarding lifts and ramps, there should be regular maintenance programs in place for all lifts and ramps. It's your duty as the driver or attendant to report any lifts or ramps that aren't operating properly. It's your company's responsibility to, in turn, make every effort to get that lift or ramp repaired before its next day of service. All right, moving on to our drug and alcohol policy. A couple things to point out. Everyone should have gone through an initial drug test if they haven't already. You will be. We also have and keep on file our substance-free workplace policy. Again, these are both contractual requirements and must be performed before anyone is allowed to be a driver or an attendant. These drug and alcohol screenings must be performed by a third-party administrator. We cannot accept any sort of do-it-yourself-at-home type kits. And just to expand on this second bullet here, again, we've already touched on the drug testing, but random drug testing is a requirement, and post-accident drug and alcohol screening is a requirement as well. So let's say there's a small little fender bender, perhaps it's not even your fault. Again, just be aware it is standard MTM policy that you will be required for a drug and alcohol screening. We have our network representatives in place here. They are the ones who will be in contact with your company. If for any reason there is a violation found, or let's say a refusal is also considered a violation, one of our network representatives will be in contact with your company to review these results. Keep in mind that suspension and termination from providing MTM services will be the result of any refusal or violation found in the substance-free workplace policy. All right, now responding to emergencies. It's quite natural, should an accident or incident occur, that the members will look to you as a leadership type role. So because of that, the first thing you want to do is remain calm. You want to do what you can to protect yourself, the members, and the vehicle. You want to determine what has happened, and if there are any actions or inactions you can take or not take that will, again, help protect the safety of you, the people, and the property. According to your company's policies, of course, you want to follow those. You want to report this just as quickly as possible. Of course, ideally, we'd all like to know immediately, but it's definitely important to keep in mind that we need to do this as quickly as it's safe to do so. You'll report that up through your dispatcher supervisor, and in accordance with their company's policies, they may then report that to MTM, or again, according to your company's policies, it may be that you are then reporting this directly to MTM. You also want to contact any emergency services as needed and in compliance with your company's policies. Keep in mind, though, that these may not be for medical emergency services. Perhaps you need a police report to help protect you. After the fact, you want to document in as much detail as possible. Again, we've got that MTM incident and accident form. That also includes filing a police report. Now on the screen, what you'll see here, this is our incident and accident form, and I realize that it's quite small, and I actually don't expect you to be able to read this. However, I just really wanted to illustrate how much detail we really are requesting here. So again, the more detail, the more information that you can record and provide, the better. All right, now moving on to record keeping. Just to give you a little bit of detail as far as what happens when a member calls in to request transportation, the first thing we'll do is we will verify that the member is eligible for the transportation services. We will then confirm that the location they're requesting provides a covered service. Once we've verified and confirmed, we'll go ahead and set the trip up within our system, and our system will automatically assign what we refer to as a trip number. Now, the majority of our trips are what we refer to as round trips. So you can think of these as member's house to doctor's appointment, back home. So basically we have two addresses simply in reverse order. Now, to let you know that those two legs are tied together or connected, if you will, we identify it with an A and a B at the end. So in our example here, you'll see we've got a trip number. They'll start off with 4 letters followed by numerals, and it ends in the A. The A lets you know that this is the to leg, the member's house to the doctor's appointment. Now, to let you know that it's connected, you'll see that we've got the exact same trip number here, and it's followed by a B. The B notifies or lets you know that it's the from leg, so from the doctor's office back to the member's house. Now, the reason why these trip logs, these record keepings are so important and so critical is because they are tied directly to the payment or the claims of a trip. So it's extremely critical that we fill these out in its entirety. Now on the screen, what you'll see here, this is our trip sheet. It's not necessarily the most common way or form that trip information is communicated. However, if your company prefers it, by all means, we want to make sure you know how to read it. Or from time to time, if your company doesn't typically use it, but again, from time to time you may see it, we want to make sure you know how to read it as well. So we'll begin at the top here. This is our confidentiality statement up here. Of course, this is because this document contains what we refer to as PHI, or protected health information. In order to remain HIPAA compliant, this information on this sheet must be held confidential. If we're not actively using it, it must be kept under lock and key. This next section is the member specific information. So we've got first name, last name, phone number, that sort of information. Now this larger midsection, this is the trip specific information. So you'll see in the upper left hand corner, this is our trip number, followed by the date, time of the appointment, the distance. That's followed by the pickup and drop off addresses. You'll also note that we've got a phone number for each location, and that's followed by any special information that you may need to know regarding this trip. So if the member uses crutches, walker, or a cane, we'll note that there for you. We'll also note if this is what we refer to as an RTP, or part of an RTP. So if the member goes to dialysis on Monday, Wednesdays, and Fridays at 10 a.m., that's what we call an RTP, or recurring trip. We'll note that for you again, just so you know that this is part of prescription or recurring trip. Now, this bottom section here, this is where we'll fill out our pickup and drop off or PUDO information, and we're actually going to go into a little bit more detail on that on our trip log, which is right here. So on this trip log, this is the most popular way that trip information is reported to MTM. You'll see in the upper left-hand corner here, we have the place for the company name, the date of service, your driver's license number, and the last 5 digits of the VIN for the vehicle that was used for that transport. In this section here, this is where we will fill out our trip information. You'll see the first column, this is where you'll fill out the trip number. Now the trip number should have one number per line. So A and B leg of a trip, 2 different lines. The A leg on one line, the B leg on a second line. The next column is for the member's name to be printed out, and that's followed by the pickup and drop off or PUDO times. Now, MTM doesn't have a preference on whether your company decides to use military time format or AM and PM 12-hour time format. It's completely up to your company. If your company determines that they prefer to use the 12-hour AM and PM time format, what we've provided for you here is a column for you to write AM and PM instead of trying to squeeze in 12:45 p.m. or writing AM and PM 4 different times for each leg of the trip. You can simply write it once. Now there are 4 pickup and drop off or PUDO times required for each leg of the trip. The first time is the scheduled time. That is the time that you or your company has determined would be an adequate amount of time to pick up the member and transport them safely and on time to their appointment. The scheduled pickup time should also be communicated the day before or the day prior to the appointment. Now again, that may be you or it may be someone else at your company, but it should be communicated to that member the day before the appointment so they know what time that they'll be ready. The second time required for each leg of the trip is the pickup arrival time. That is what time you've arrived to pick up the member. So depending on weather or traffic, you may be a minute or 2 before that scheduled pickup time, or you may be a minute or 2 behind that scheduled pickup time. The third time is the pickup departure time. That is what time members in the car, seatbelt on, ready to go. Now, it's quite possible that your pickup arrival and pickup departure time will be the exact same time. However, it's more than likely, and I would say majority of the time, there will be at least a couple minutes between the pickup arrival and pickup departure time. Now, the fourth and final time required for each leg of the trip is the destination arrival time. And that is quite simply what time you arrived at that destination location and dropped the member off. So again, 4 PUDO times for each leg of the trip. One thing I want to cover, what happens if the member has a will call, or what we refer to as a will call, for their return leg or their from leg of the trip. In that case, what we'll do, instead of putting NA or will call, or you may also see it noted as in military time format 2359. Now that doesn't mean we need you to pick the member up at their for their B leg or their from leg to go home at 11:59 p.m. That is just how we signal the will call. So instead of writing any of those things in that first column under the scheduled pickup time for the return leg, you'll write what time the member called. So if they call at 2 p.m. and say, I am ready for my return leg, I'm ready to go home, 2 p.m. will be your scheduled pickup time, and the remaining 3 times will be just as we described. So again, I want to stress, PUDO stands for pickup and drop off, and there are 4 times required for each leg of the trip. Now, this final column, this is where the member will sign. And I want to stress that this is a member signature. It is not initials. We cannot accept, and your company will not be paid if you obtain initials instead of a signature. Now, let's say we are transporting a young child and the child just isn't old enough or can't sign yet. Mom, dad, guardian may sign on behalf of that child. Now, keep in mind they should sign their signature. They should not sign the child's name. From time to time, and it's quite rare that it would occur, you may have an individual who can't sign for themselves. Let's say we're transporting someone home from cancer treatments and they're experiencing some of the side effects of those treatments, the nausea, the weakness, the exhaustion. They live by themselves, so there's no one at home to sign on their behalf. They're okay to be left at home alone, but they just need to go in after feeling those side effects. They need to take care of themselves. What you can do in those rare scenarios will be to write the acronym PUTS. That's P as in Paul, U as in umbrella, T as in Tom, S as in Sam, so PUTS, and that stands for passenger unable to sign. So again, that's PUTS, PUTS, passenger unable to sign. Now, as I mentioned before, it's critical that you fill this out in its entirety. Once you've filled out the trip information, you're not quite done yet. What we ask you to do, we ask that you sign and print your name down at the bottom. The reason why we ask this is because we ask that as you do this, you are certifying that all of the information is accurate and correct. So again, it ties into that fraud, waste, and abuse that we were talking about. So that is your certification that everything on here is true and correct. That concludes our session today. Thank you for your participation.